Hello, everybody, and welcome to Music Industry Insights Worldwide. And today we have the awesome Steve Budd with us. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm very good, Saskia. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. And thank you so much for coming along today to share your story, your views, and your kind of journey through the music industry. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself, what you do, and where you're from?
I'm from London. I've been working in music my entire life, since I was 15 years old. So I'll leave you to guess how long that's been, but it's been quite a number of decades.
Yeah.
And I do several things. I am a manager of record producers and songwriters, and I've been doing that for 40 years. I'm a manager of artists and been doing that for almost as long. And I started some music festivals, which we can talk about in the UK and India and Korea. Um, I've been involved in running Damon Albarn's Africa Express project for 15 years.
Okay.
And I was also involved in starting what's now become Brits Week, as artists playing shows in support of War Child, major artists, tiny little venues, and we can go into that in a little bit more detail. So I was the chairman of the Music Managers Forum for a number of years, the MMF, and I consult with different music and tech related businesses. So it's quite a variety of a spectrum of things. And in the past, I've run record labels and done all sorts of other jobs within music, but it's been a long haul.
It sounds like you've had an amazing journey with so many diverse kind of talents that you use to kind of progress you through the industry. So tell us a little bit more. How did you get into it? Did you have a musical education, or was it just a passion that you just followed your heart with, or how did that work?
Well, I was insanely passionate about music from a very early age. I mean, I come from a generation where our choices were music, football, and basically that was it, wasn't it? So, and I was into both, but I knew I was no footballer. I
Yeah.
wanted to be a musician, but I didn't really have that encouragement and support from people.
Yeah.
But I was playing in bands when I was sort of 15, 16. But at that time, there was a big sort of free festival movement in the UK, and lots of hippies running free festivals. And I got involved in that side of things, and ended up becoming at a very early age. In fact, I was 15, 16 years old, a stage manager at a free festival called
Wow.
Watchfield Free Festival. And it so happened that Hawkwind happened to play at that festival, and it was one of the last shows that they did with Lemmy as their bass player. Lemmy then left Hawkwind, and I got a call. My mum got a call from the guy who ran Lemmy's PA company, to say, would I like to come and roadie? Lemmy had got a new band together. Would I like to come and roadie at his festival, at his first show? And that band, of course, was Motorhead. So I went and was lucky enough to be the roadie at the very first Motorhead gig. I'm just going to move back a little bit because the sun's come out and obscuring the screen. And that was my real entree. My first paid, gig working in music was as a roadie for Motorhead. And then following that period, I did a load of shows with them, and then I ended up roadieing with, down at places, venues like the Vortex and the Marquee and the 100 Club and all these amazing venues in London during the sort of end period of punk.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, I was sort of spending a life on the road, and I did that for a number of years, and then decided I wanted to start releasing records. So I started up a little indie label, which it was that period
Yes.
where there was, Rough Trade had started, and there was lots of little indie labels kind of like popping up all over the place. And I thought I'd like to do that. And there were some bands that I wanted to record, and that was the beginning of working on the business side.
Well, well done you, because you've done really well on that. I also noted that you have lots of diverse talent on your roster. So you also manage artists and producers. So tell us a little bit more about your roster, who you represent, and kind of the different ethnicities and backgrounds that you also push forward as well.
Okay, so yeah, I started managing record producers after, well, let me give you the trajectory. So I started this little label when I was 20 years old, putting out 7-inch singles.
Yeah.
And none of the bands that I was putting out the singles of had managers,
Mhm.
right? And I realized very quickly that somebody needed to be doing the organization of, like they need gigs. They
Yeah.
need a van to get to the gigs. So I took on a couple of the bands that were on the label and started managing them. I didn't really know what I was doing, but
Right.
I did know what needed to happen next. So it was, learning by mistake. And they had, of course, they suffered for that, but they also got some wins out of that. And a couple of the bands that I had on the label, I managed to get major label record deals for. So I recorded their albums, very cheaply, and then ended up selling them to major labels and then becoming the manager. So that was how I sort of got onto the management ladder. And then I got into managing producers, which nobody else was doing at the time, because one of the bands that I'd signed to MCA Records at the time was a band called the Big Sound Authority. And we'd had a hit. We had a top 20 hit and did Top of the Pops and did all of those things. But there was no A&R person involved. I'd made the record myself. And the label said, okay, well, we want to make an album. You need to go and find a producer. So I didn't know anything really about producers. And then I was a big fan of David Bowie, and I thought, well, who was the producer for David Bowie? And of course, it was Tony Visconti. So Tony happened to have his studio in Dean Street in Soho, and I thought, well, that's just round the corner. I'll go knock on the door and see if he's into producing my band. So I literally turned up with a cassette and said, I've got a band signed to MCA. Are you interested in producing them? And then, dropped off the cassette. And then later that afternoon, I got a call from his office saying Tony would like to meet you. Can he come and see you? And he turned up at my tiny little office, which was a tiny one-room shack, basically, on his motorbike, incredibly glamorous, and said, tell me about this band. And that was the beginning of our relationship. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he was the first producer client I ended up managing and running his studio called Good Earth Studios. It's still there in Dean Street. It's now called Dean Street Studios. And it was one of the very first SSL studios in the world. And during that period of managing him and running his studio, I kind of learned a lot about record production. And I thought, I can manage other producers primarily to keep that studio full, right? Because we were working 24 hours a day, 30 days a month. And of course, Tony couldn't work there all the time on his own. So the idea became that I manage other producers. So the very first other producer I took on, I went to America and found I'd fallen in love with a record called by an artist called Africa Bambaataa and Soul Sonic Force. And I thought, who produced this? It was like one of the first kind of like really electro hip hop records where electro meets hip hop. And I discovered it was a guy called Arthur Baker. And I went to America and found him in New York and persuaded him that he should come to the UK. And he said, you line me up the work, I'll come if you line me up the work. So I found him a whole bunch of tracks to mix and then flew him over to the UK. And he was my first outside client. And over a number of years, then I took on, many, many amazing clients. I've managed people from Chris Kimsey, who did the Rolling Stones, Mike Hedges, who I still manage, who produces all the Manic Street Preachers, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, U2, you name it, and built up a roster of people who were working in different but complementary areas within music and have ended up, making thousands of records over the last 30 years, some of which you can see behind me, some of which go up.
I'm manifesting those at the moment. That's
Unfortunately, the days are gone when they hand out those discs because those were all for CDs and record sales. But I built a career managing producers, and as I said, there wasn't really that much competition at the time. And I was very, very lucky to have that moment where, you know, I found a niche in the market. And then later on in the 90s and 80s and 90s, I started managing bands again, and I was managing bands like the Gang of Four, Heaven 17, artists like Tanita Tikaram, and have continued managing artists, you know, to this day. Most recently, you know, a couple of years ago, I had a band called Dry the River who did really well. I had another band called Songhoy Blues, and currently I'm managing a band called Nubiyan Twist, who are coming out of the whole sort of like London kind of jazz world. They're kind of, you know, in that Ezra Collective kind of vibe, and they're doing pretty well at the moment. So, you know, that's the range of artists and kind of producers that I've been involved with. But I'm managing currently, I think it's 25 producers, and we're working with everybody from Kanye West through to, you know, little indie bands, you know, based in Hackney. So it's really very much across the board.
I was going to say that as well, because you've got very diverse talent, but you've also got very diverse genres as well, which is fantastic. So you don't just focus on one genre, you're very eclectic with what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, we like to have people represented in pretty much every genre of music, so that, you know, we own the domain record-producers.com. So when people search for producers, we come up top. So, you know, if they're searching for producers in hip hop, or if they're searching producers in jazz or in metal, we want to have somebody that might be appropriate for them in pretty much every genre. So I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to that side of things. You know, our criteria for working with the artists is, you know, are they any good? You know, if they're good enough, then we'll try and find a producer for them. And secondary, you know, do they have the budget to make a record? And if they, and budgets can be anything from, you know, we've got enough to make an EP to we want to make a full-scale album at Abbey Road Studios. So there's a vast scale within that too. So it's trying to find something suitable for the artist given where they are at that particular moment. Somebody who can add something to the quality of what they're doing and deliver, you know, a great record. That's the kind of key focus of it all.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. I wish there was more people doing that, to be honest, like actually bespoking the work that they do around the artist, rather than just giving them something and saying, there you go, off you go. You know,
Yeah, it's quite a skill to try and match the right set, because there's so many different types of record producers. You know, you've got record producers who come from an engineering background, those who come from being a musician, those who come from being an arranger, those who come from perhaps being a vocal producer. You know, it really is, and then those who specialize in each individual area of music. So, you know, you don't want to necessarily stick a producer who's working with metal acts into producing a hip hop record. Although sometimes you might want to do that, you know? So it's very, you know, we have conversations with the artist, conversations with the artist manager or the A&R person from the record company, and really try and get under their bonnet and understand what it is that this act needs at this particular moment in time. And once we've narrowed that down, and there may be a criteria of, you know, 10 or 15 different aspects to this to kind of get clear about what kind of producer they actually need, then we can make a suggestion based on that understanding and knowledge. So, you know, there's a lot of kind of like learning and historical learning that goes into asking those kind of questions.
Also having that education and skill set to be able to do that as well, right? Because you need that.
Sure. And that's based on just, you know, learning painful mistakes over 40 years. You know?
Yeah, I get that. Thank you. And tell us a little bit more about the festivals that you do. I know you do some great festivals, so let's hear more about that.
Sure. I kind of you know, the festivals came about sort of serendipitously, accidentally. Basically, the first one that I set up was in India. in 2010, and that's become an institution. It's called the NH7 Weekender, and it happens every year in Pune, which is about a 3-hour drive from Mumbai, in India. And now it's 30 or 40,000 people every year, and it's a mixture of UK, US artists, Australian too, and Indian artists, and it's quite agnostic and across the board musically. It started because I randomly had been asked by the British Council to go to India to go and judge a competition over there, called the Young Indian Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And whilst I was there, this was 2009, the guy who won that competition was a young Indian promoter stroke manager. And he then came to the UK, and we got, we went out that night, funnily enough, in Mumbai, and I saw some incredible Indian indie bands playing, and I had no idea that those kind of artists were so popular in India. And talking to him, it was like, yeah, but none of these artists come over here. They don't come and play in India. And at the time, we had a management company called Supervision Management that I'd started that managed Franz Ferdinand and the Kaiser Chiefs and various other artists. And I was lucky enough to be involved in that. And I said, well, we should be bringing those kind of artists over to India, And so the seed was born about starting a festival. Then he came to London, and I introduced him to the guys from Glastonbury Festival, Martin Elborn. And the three of us sat down and decided that we were going to set up our own version of an indie music festival in India. And I put some money up for it. Martin put some money up for it. We went back over to India, found a site, and Vijay, who was the guy who won, Vijay Nair, put together the most amazing festival. And I brought over some English bands, Asian Dub Foundation and Reverend and the Makers and the Magic Numbers and Dry the River, who I was managing at the time. And we did the first one in 2010. And that was really successful for, small, 5,000 people. The next year we did it in Pune and in Delhi. The next year we did it Pune, Delhi, Calcutta. The next year we did it Pune, Delhi, Calcutta and Bangalore. And before long, we had 8, and we were bringing over everybody from Cigarettes After Sex to Bombay Bicycle Club. We did the first ever Afrobeat gigs in India with Sheun Kuti and Ejit Deity. We then were bringing in Cigarettes After Sex and Steve Vai and Steve Wilson and Megadeth. And, the whole thing kind of just grew and grew and grew until it became a very, very significant festival. And that festival is still running today. So that was the first festival I got involved with, and I set up a small festival in the UK called One Fest, where it was a kind of not-for-profit festival, but the idea was that it was run by young people setting up their first ever events. And I had everybody from Damien Rice to Damon Albarn to the Magic Numbers, and a whole variety of people played that particular festival. The last edition of it we had Shabaka Hutchins of Comet Is Coming and his variety of acts that he had participating in that event. And so it was a mixture of events that are sort of for profit and events that are kind of not for profit. In 2005, I got involved with Damon Albarn in setting up Africa Express, which is a musical collaborations project between Western artists and African artists, with the idea that we could create a new window of focus on African artists who at the time were being ignored. Nobody was interested. And we just come off the back of Live 8, and it's about raising, dropping the African debt. Huge artists playing, everybody from Madonna to Pink Floyd, from The Who to Nana Cherry, but there were no African artists playing. And that was incredibly why are there no African artists when African artists are some of the best live music performers that exist? So we got together to see if we could change the narrative around that and start to get Western artists and African artists collaborating together, with the idea that if you're a fan of, say, Beyonce, and you see her performing with an artist that you have no idea who they are, then you're going to Google that artist and want to find out about them, and it gives them a platform to grow from. And in fact, one of the artists that we discovered, Moonchild Sonelli, along the way, in South Africa has ended up working with Beyonce and performing with them. So, you know, those kind of wonderful collaborations we managed to create in, you know, by taking artists out to Ethiopia, Nigeria, Mali, South Africa, and then putting on shows in the UK, in Europe, recording albums, making movies. Again, it's all a not-for-profit, but it was incredibly, you know, satisfying to be able to do these things.
And it also empowers new talent as well, doesn't it? And diversity and representation, which is extremely important.
Absolutely. So we would go and find younger artists. We would find very established artists, but put them together with younger artists, giving those people a platform. Perhaps some of the African artists, the first time that anybody outside their you know, local town or country had ever heard of them. So it gives them this ability to be able to sort of reach out and potentially start the, you know, the beginnings of a meaningful international career. That was the purpose of it. And we've done that, you know, for the last sort of, you know, 15 years. So I was involved for 15 years of it. Yeah.
To hear that as well. And it always sounds like, when I'm listening to your story as well, like you've been very innovative. You've always been cutting edge. You've always looked for a little gap that someone else isn't doing. And then you said, do you know what? I'm going to do that. Has that worked for you?
Very much so. I mean, I think, you know, the music has always come first for me. It's always been about, you know, like, am I inspired by the music? And if I am truly inspired, and that's certainly true for managing artists, particularly, because, you know, you have to give your kind of like blood and guts to it in order to make it work, you know? And I've kind of gone for the more niche artists, you know. It's not been like I've wanted to manage Take That. I mean, there's plenty of Take That you know, discs behind me, but that was from managing the producers and songwriters who were involved in that. But, you know, for me, it was, if I'm going to manage an artist, it's because I'm utterly passionate about that particular artist and the music. And I feel that if I'm passionate about it, other people are going to be passionate about it too. And those happen to be sort of slightly more, yeah, niche artists, and bringing them onto a bigger stage. And that to me is, you know, is the juice, I think, that I need to kind of like drink in order to make me, you know, go through what it takes to manage an artist from day one, where nobody knows about them, trying to get them onto the main stage at Glastonbury, you know.
Development stage is super, super important, and having the right people around you that believe in you and that can get you to that next step. Because there's also a lot of people in the industry that will say, yeah, I can do this and I can do that, but they can't always deliver. So I think it's also about finding those right people and connecting with the right people and networking, right?
Absolutely. And that's why something like the Music Managers Forum, the MMF, and its sister organization, the Featured Artists Coalition, are such important organizations, because they exist in order to, you know, connect people with each other, managers connecting with each other so they can learn from each other's experiences, but also, you know, understanding the wider topics that affect the music industry and therefore their clients, and act as a lobbying organization to government, to wherever, to, you know, change the conditions that artists are working under, whether that's streaming, whether that's the income they're getting from live, whether it's the subsidies that need to exist in order to fund the bottom end of the music industry. You know, the MMF is a very powerful campaigning organization, and I was lucky enough to be the chairman of it for 3 years. And the Featured Artists Coalition is doing the same for, you know, for artists. It gives them a platform to talk to each other, an educational base, to understand how the complexities of the music industry fit together. It's super important that people understand how, you know, the engines of the music industry work, so that they can, you know, really be conscious about it when they're entering into it, and not be sort of like blindly diving in, you know. More knowledge available, the better, is as far as I'm concerned.
It also promotes collaboration between artist managers and other artists as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which I think is really beneficial to everyone too. So what's your kind of thoughts and feelings around equality, diversity and inclusion at the moment in the music and entertainment industry?
Well, I mean, you know, there's been a lot of work done on it, you know,
Yeah.
over the last 5 years, I would say. I think up until 5 years ago, there was really quite a sort of oh, we're not so bothered about this. The level of consciousness wasn't kind of like so there. At the MMF, we've, been very conscious about wanting to, make sure that our board is diverse as possible. And in fact, it is a majority women and non-binary board these days, which is kind of, I think, brilliant. And also, getting the ratio right in terms of, minorities and inclusion on that scale. And, the chairman, the co-chairman at the moment, the vice chairman is Kwame Kwatan, who's an amazing man who's done so much to kind of work on educating the music industry about inclusion. And that's been a really powerful development, I think, over the last 5 years. So I think that the MMF actually has led the way with a lot of other organizations now who've caught up with it. I think there's been, there was a big sort of moment of upheaval, rightfully, during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. And, that spurred a lot of
Change.
Accelerated change, and the major companies became a lot more aware, and industry organizations generally became a lot more aware. So I think that there's been, some significant moments, certainly, organize it, or a variety of organizations sprung up to promote and support diversity and inclusion. Brilliant, so, it's got better and there's still a way to go, so, but the consciousness is there, the consciousness is around that, which I think is a positive development.
Good. And what would you like to see improve in the next couple of years? I know we've come quite a long way from when you started 40 years ago to now. Like, what would you like to see improve more? What could we do?
I think there's so many areas. I think that deals for artists with labels still need considerable work. I think that the relationship of the major labels to the music industry is changing.
Yeah.
I think so much more power has been disseminated to smaller businesses and individual businesses of artists themselves. And I think it's been an accelerated learning process that people have gone through, understanding what it is that they've got to do in order to be able to sort of promote their music themselves, release it themselves. But now the whole funding models and the way that people earn out of music really needs to be kind of looked at, and the funding of the key issues, the funding of the bottom end. We've seen lots of music venues close over the last few years, and this is terrifying because where do these people where do young artists develop their craft? And so, keeping grassroots music alive, and the Music Venues Trust is a big part of that, drawing attention to that particular aspect. That is an area that I'm particularly passionate about, and how the industry as a whole can support that, because I think there's too much short-termism in the major labels. I think there's too much short-termism sometimes with the major festival promoters. They're not thinking about, well, who are the artists going to be in 10 years' time? Who are the headliners going to be in 10 years' time? Where are they going to come from? The only place that they can come from is learning their craft, playing live, right? And where do they start? They start in the small grassroots venues. Those need to be kept running. So I think that the financial support of those, I think, is really important. Now we're entering into a really tough time over the next few years. We've seen, recently in the UK, the government, the new government coming in and realizing that the cupboard is bare, and that they're not going to have money to sort of like really invest in the arts. So, the industry itself is going to have to really step up and start to think about, do we do a ticket levy? Every one of those Oasis tickets that sold, for 300, 400 pounds each, if a pound of every one of those had gone into supporting small venues, and bear in mind that Oasis are the quintessential band that came from small venues. I was involved in running, you know, small venues like the Barfly and places like that. And, you know, absolutely, you know, Oasis would come down and play those venues. And if they hadn't, they wouldn't be where they are today. If Oasis hadn't been playing in King Tut's in Glasgow, Alan McGee wouldn't have seen them and signed them to Creation Records, and the story wouldn't have started in that way. You know, might have started in another way, but the perfect story that evolved out of that for them. So I think that, you know, if how many stadium shows they're going to be doing, if every one of those attendees, you know, had £1 on their ticket, then that would go a significant way to saving a lot of music venues. So that's something I'm particularly passionate about.
I do sit on the live task force panel for diversity. So yeah, I do understand a lot of the issues that the live music industry faces. And we do work with a lot of these organizations you've mentioned. And I think it's a great idea. What you said is in France, I think they actually already do that. So I think that's another thing that we were looking at already.
Yeah. And in Canada, there's always been a levy on, you know, record sales, which then go into the independent sector, on a levy on streaming, you know. And I think we need to really be sort of pushing for that, because the money's got to come from somewhere. The Arts Council grants are going to be drastically slashed, so they're not going to be able to support as much as they wanted to. PRS are not going to be able to support as much as they would want to. So the money's got to come from somewhere.
Fingers crossed we sort it out, because if we don't, government will. And this is the balance that the industry has to find, isn't it? It's either going to be the government's going to have to say we're going to have to do this, or the industry figures it out itself without being regulated.
Well, the government's got other priorities right now. You know, the country's in a bit of a mess, and you know, it's got, you know, all of its social aspects that it needs to, you know, focus on. We wish that it had the bandwidth to focus on the, you know, the music industry, which is actually such an important contributor to the economy, right? But I suspect, and it's too early to tell, but I suspect that although the government will be a lot more sympathetic towards the music industry than perhaps the previous government, I think that their ability to be able to channel funds and channel resources towards the grassroots of our industry is going to be limited, right? Whether they can give tax breaks, VAT on tickets, or other tax breaks to the industry, that would be fantastic. But let's see. It's too early to tell. They've got a lot of other priorities. But you know, hopefully, before the next election, which will be in 5 years' time, we will be in a better position with them, engaging with them. So I'm hopeful around that.
So do I. Time has run out. We've got 5 minutes left. So is there any major wins or successes you'd like to share with us? And is there any ways people can connect with you if they want to reach out, get some advice, collaborate, find out the way?
Yeah, they can reach out via the website, which is record-producers.com. record-producers, and there you can email us and connect with us, and we're very open to talking and about collaboration, etc. And you know, current things I'm working on a possible big new festival for not just the UK, but an international moving festival in 2026, which I can't talk too much about yet, because you know it's confidential. But I mean, it will be very exciting, very different way of looking at festivals. You know, something that other people haven't kind of quite conceived of yet. I'm working on a couple of small record label ideas, both of which are more than ideas, they're actually happening. So those are going to launch later this year. So yeah, one is to do with African music and the other is to do with jazz music. So I'm quite excited about both of those too.
I was part of Key Change last year, and it was really nice to go around different countries and see the little festivals and concerts and how people come together, and even doing things in different countries. It's not the same as doing it in the UK. Every country's got their own little territory, hasn't it? And they do things differently. So
absolutely. You know, I one of my great pleasures in life, like on Sunday, I'm flying out to Armenia because I've been invited to talk at the first ever Armenian Music Week in Yerevan. And I'm very excited about that. But, you know, that's the wonderful thing about music. You can end up going to the most extraordinary places you never imagined in your wildest dreams that you would be going to. So, you know, that to me is the, you know, people say join the Navy and see the world. Well, I didn't join the Navy. I joined the music business and I got to see the world. So, you know, that is one of the definite upsides of being involved in music.
Oh, well, thank you ever so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you this morning.
Likewise.
Amazing week ahead, and just keep up the amazing work as well, because you're absolutely fantastic.
Thanks, Saskia. Really good to talk to you. Okay.
See you soon.
You take care.
Thank you.
Bye.